Okay, welcome back to our study of Exodus. Today we get to total freedom moment. Total freedom moment, and not only are we now experiencing total freedom from slavery, which they've had now for a few days as they've journeyed toward the Red Sea, but now they're going to be free from even the threat of returning to slavery against their will. And if you've never lived through a moment like that, you know there's a big difference between being free and further than that, being free from even the threat of returning. And so this is a very big deal moment. So today we're coming to the crossing of the Red Sea, one of the most incredible and most well-remembered powerful stories in all of the Bible. In case you missed last week, we talked about the journey to the Red Sea and how there's only two real possibilities that match the Bible description on where the crossing of the Red Sea happened. Maybe you remember from these pictures from last week, there is a little map that we talked about last week with the routes going to the Gulf of Aqaba. The top picture there is the one of, actually I never looked at it. Oh, okay, no, it's not top and bottom. Okay, I'm glad I turned around. The picture on your left is the Nuweiba Beach crossing spot, and you can see they wandered down through the Wadi in order to get there, where they're completely trapped against the sea, one way in and out with the Egyptians coming down after them. Nuweiba Beach. The other one is at the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba, and it's called the Tiran crossing, the Strait of Tiran. And so again, they would have tracked around to the bottom, and they'd set up camp with no way in or out once the Egyptians had them hemmed in. The main thing that I want you to remember that we're going to carry in from last week is from Exodus chapter 14, verse 2. And this is at the center of understanding the Exodus crossing, at least its starting point here. And Exodus 14:2 says, okay, and it's about how specific God is being. Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp. And then he's going to give a very, very detailed, specific place that he wants them to camp. To camp in front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. Okay, I just want to lay it in a little bit thicker. Camp in this place. In front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, you must camp in front of Baal Zephon, facing it, by the sea. There is such precision with all of these different factors of God is leading them to a very specific exact location. It's not like they just ended up somewhere randomly and then God does a miracle to rescue them out of their random spot. No, God had a very specific place in mind, and he led them to an exact place. It was very important to them, to God, that they must camp in an exact spot that he has in mind for one of his epic miracles of all time. So hold on to that thought, okay? As we continue to read and see what happens to God's people now that they've arrived at this exact spot. Okay, I'm going to pick up reading. Exodus 14, I'll just pick up reading with the last verse from last week and then continue forward. Verse 9 from Exodus 14. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen, and his army, chased after them and caught up with them as they camped by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal Zephon. They're there, right? Verse 10, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and there were the Egyptians coming after them. The Israelites were terrified, and cried out to Yahweh for help. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Now, I could make a big comment here. I could preach a whole message about fear, about turning against God when you don't realize how incredible he's being to you in a particular moment because you're afraid. If we don't trust the goodness of God in times of stress, in times of crisis, we'll grumble and complain usually at the very moment that God has perfectly set you up for what might turn out to be one of your most remembered God moments of your life. Trusting God means turning to him expectantly in times of crisis, not turning against him. Later, the psalmist, in Psalm 106, the psalmist is a code word for whoever it was that wrote this psalm. In Psalm 106, verse 7, writing about the Red Sea, the guy who wrote it said, our ancestors, or woman, I guess, our ancestors in Egypt did not grasp the significance of your wondrous works, thinking of the plagues, or remember your many acts of faithful love. Instead, they rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. Yet, God saved them for his name's sake to make his power known. I'm just pausing for a moment because maybe someone needs to hear this. That maybe because your days have been rough and maybe you've been grumbly. Maybe you've been grumbly and maybe even turned against God or put God on the shelf or just kind of ignored him for a little bit because you're not happy with where your life is at the moment. And I just encourage you to stop. Stop that. And to remember God's faithful love to you in your past and to trust him for his goodness today, even if you can't see it yet. Even if you can't see how he's being good to you, just to trust him with that. Okay, that's free. We're keeping reading here. Verse 13. But Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. Okay, and that's the message that God's people need to speak into one another's lives. Don't be afraid. Stand firm. Again, these are messages which you can spur one another on in. Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. Yahweh will fight for you and you must be quiet. The Lord, Yahweh, said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to break camp. As for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and drive it so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. As for me, God speaking about himself, I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh, all his army and his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh, when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the angel of God who was going in front of the Israelite forces moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved in front of them and stood behind them. It came between the Egyptians and Israelite forces. There was cloud and darkness. It lit up the night, and neither group came near the other all night long. Just a reminder, God rescues, but he is also able to protect you for as long as it takes for his ultimate rescue to happen. These people are thinking it's too late for the rescue, and it appears to be too late, except for God does a miracle. By the way, this wall of fire and cloud would have been one of the most extraordinary miracles on any other day of the planet. It almost gets lost here. It kind of does get lost here. But yeah, he's able to protect you even when it seems way too late for him to help and rescue you. Just throwing that out there as we keep reading. Verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. Yahweh drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. Okay, this is an incredible miracle, right? It's an incredible miracle. Now notice that the Bible is clear that a significant aspect of working of this miracle is a strong east wind. Okay, the Bible is very clear that this is a significant means of this miracle taking place. Now, there had to be more at work than just a wind that would cause a wall to go up on each side. How fierce of wind are we talking? We're talking, it's got to be some sort of super tornado, right? Super hurricane from the east blasting right in their faces as they're crossing the sea. It is, if it's going to drive back the sea, this is a powerful super tornado force winds. And that's only going to push back so many meters of depth, right? It's been all night, but remember, these people are going to have to walk forward through the wind. facing the wind. And so there's limits on actually how intense this wind could have been. Some say the wind, it had some effect, but it mostly was drying out the sea floor so they could go on dry land. The reality is there's no way it could have been just an east wind without also the work of God directing it very specifically to a specific part of the sea and also to kind of hold it back itself. Okay, so otherwise, if it was powerful enough to do this miracle, you're probably blowing the nation through the wall of fire and maybe off the peninsula on the other side. Depending on. Do you ever think of the severity of the storm, though? I never do. Do you ever think of the severity of the storm? God's people, they're enduring this storm as he's making a way through the sea for them to cross. I kind of think of it as a sunny day. And God just kind of, okay, or it crossed. Listen to this moment from Psalm 77 where it describes what's going on here. It's a crazy storm. It says in Psalm 77, the clouds poured down water, the storm clouds thundered, your arrows flashed back, thinking of like lightning and flashed back and forth. The sound of your thunder was in the whirlwind. I'm not making up this hurricane, tornado type imagery. That's straight from the Bible. Was in the whirlwind. Lightning lit up the world. The earth shook and quaked. Your way went through the sea and your path through the vast water. By the way, sometimes the worst storms in life that you will ever live through are God's way of leading you and opening up your better future. Trust him. Trust him. Let's keep reading. Verse 23, the Egyptians set out in pursuit. All Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen, and went into the sea after them. During the morning watch, Yahweh looked down at the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve and made them drive with difficulty. Let's get away from Israel, the Egyptians said, because Yahweh is fighting for them against Egypt. Then Yahweh said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal depth. While the Egyptians were trying to escape from it, Yahweh threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. But the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. That day, Yahweh saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptian dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power of Yahweh used against the Egyptians, the people feared Yahweh and believed in him and his servant Moses. Wow. That's all I have to say. Wow. What a moment. You mind if we look at the crossing for a moment? You mind if we look at the crossing for a moment again? As I said, last week we've come to 2 potential locations. I will tell you which one I believe and why, mostly because I can't keep it secret from my voice, but I want to remind you that my opinion does not matter. So don't worry about my opinion. It's one of these locations, and now that I've made it clear that my opinion doesn't matter, neither does yours. So we're just going to talk about these 2 locations. It could be either, okay? The first one that we talked about is Nuweiba Beach. Here's a picture of Nuweiba Beach crossing from Google Earth. It is 16 kilometers across, and it can be crossed in the right time span, as the Bible lays out. One of the challenges of assessing the Red Sea crossing is always the depth of the Red Sea, and specifically the steep cliff-like banks that you would have to go down and then go back up. Now, one of the great things about the Nuweiba crossing here is it's not as deep as some of the other locations in the Red Sea. And it's also, the slopes going down and back up again are more gentle and gradual than other places. The nation could have actually done this. They could have actually walked down the slopes here, not as deep as it could have been, and then it walked back up. It's deep, but it's possible. Here's a picture combining Google Earth and the underwater depth readings, along with a chart of kind of the slope of the underneath there. Now, 3,500 years ago, it would have been a bit steeper. Just silt has built up over time. That's okay. It still would have been fine, not too difficult of crossing. Notice the depth. The depth is 875 meters, or 2,870 feet, over a half mile. Over a half mile deep. The whole nation, including children and animals, are going to be hiking down through this about a half mile and back up again. Challenging, but there's a lot that it's less challenging when you've got an Egyptian army chasing after you, right? So I'm not too worried about that. They're probably pretty motivated. Now, what I do want to say, we're talking about over a half mile of depth here. There's no way the wind alone could have blown back a half mile deep water, held it back while they walked into the wind across this crossing. The wind force, it would have blown them off the planet, okay? But the wind is a part of it. If it's here, it's a part of it. For some reason, it's part of this story. The Bible makes that clear. Now, this is the most explored of all the crossing sites. If you've ever seen stories or heard pictures of this one, like this one here, where people claiming to have searched the sea floor here and found chariot wheels, if you've ever heard anything like that, or chariot pieces, it's from this area. As a note, I've seen some pretty convincing pictures of coral that does look a lot like chariot wheels, and that does look like chariot tops. What I was surprised to learn is that not one single piece of coral has ever been tested in this area. Nothing has been brought up to the surface and looked at. It's a protected area, but still nothing has happened. And although it's exciting, actually, it seems pretty impossible that a chariot would have lasted through the coral process, the coral formation. I don't know what to call this. This is what chariots would have looked like. Okay, here's an example of chariots would have looked like from a museum picture. The chariots in Egypt were built as light as possible. Basically just wood and leather. No metal. No metal at all. On all of the chariots, they're built for speed. They're built for quickness. Later, 5 dynasties later, you would start to see them a little bit more fortified in the front. 5 dynasties later, you might see a little bit of metal on them to support the new fortifications. In the 18th dynasty, 5 dynasties later, they start to look a little bit more like the Roman chariots that we're used to seeing. But the 13th dynasty, the chariots are new. They're new tech. They're new military tech. They're light. They're fast. That's just how they are. So just being wood and leather, they're just going to float away. They don't sink. They're going to float away. Even if somehow they did sink, they're wood and leather. They're not going to last long enough in place to be coralified or whatever. And with the way that the water is just going to rush back, if you got a half mile high water smashing into this place, who knows where it's going to end up, right? It's just everywhere. Probably the most disappointing discovery is this stuff about the chariots. I really love the idea of these chariots being discovered, and especially looking at the coral pictures, I'm like, yeah, that does look like that. But there was no metal. There's no metal to last. The whole metal detector thing, they're looking 5 dynasties for too wrong. And so, again, that's Nuweiba Beach Crossing. It is the most investigated. It easily could have been this location, but personally I prefer the other location because of the geography. Now again, before I show you this, I want to warn you that just because I like this one doesn't mean anything. Okay? It doesn't mean anything. We're not fighting about this, but I'm right. Okay, so let's start with the Google Earth view from the top. Okay, this is what's called the Tiran Strait crossing. Can you see it? Can you see why? There is an underwater land bridge here that you can't see from the shore. It's an underwater land bridge that no one knew was there. If you don't have a satellite view or an airplane view or a helicopter view, which they didn't have, you're not going to see anything. You're not going to see anything. Here's another Google Earth angle. You can see that the water that under the water here, you've got this raised land bridge with this vast majority being less than 50 meters deep, 150 feet deep. 150 feet. Now, that's nothing like 2,870 feet deep. A low tide plus a strong east wind could have mostly peeled back the sea here and exposed this underwater pathway, as the Bible describes. Also note the island here. It seems that 3,500 years ago, it's very likely the island was connected to the mainland. If not, the crossing is 16 kilometers, just like the other, but if it was connected, which it most likely was, the crossing is only 5 kilometers. Only 5 kilometers across. So you have a much, much shallower crossing, like vastly more shallow crossing, and a much, much closer crossing here at the Tiran Strait place. Here's the topological information again, and you can just see it by the colors, right? Deep sea, and it just comes up right here. That's it. Oh, wait, the picture. Oh, yeah, here's a picture. Here's a picture of people standing on the reef. Okay? Now, sure, it's 6 feet higher back then, just depending on tides, though, right? It's not that deep. Wind can blow that dry, right? Okay. Anyways, Google Earth. No, where am I at now? Okay, topological information. Again, the next one. You can see now how it just comes up. The deep bits just come up to that particular crossing place. You have this path there that's hidden from the beginning of time, and it does dip down slightly, as you can see on the chart down below, up to 250, 300 meters or so. That's about 900 feet. Nothing, again, like the 2,870 feet of the other location. You know, it's possible that the Bible talks about this underwater pathway. I usually don't quote from the New Living Translation because it's less of a word-for-word translation and it's more thought by thought. But there's this verse in Psalm 77 where the Hebrew meaning of the words isn't known. So it's not helpful to do a word-for-word translation when you don't know the meaning of the word, and so you have to go thought by thought. And this is what we read about the Red Sea crossing from Psalm 77:19 in the New Living Translation. It said, "Your road led through the sea, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there." A pathway no one knew was there. I read this. I look at the amazing geography under the sea here, an underwater pathway no one knew was there, 4 kilometers wide enough for the nation to go through easily, gently sloping down and back up for the first 2 kilometers, then sort of flat the rest of the way. I see God being very clear, sending his people to a very, very specific place that they must go to for this miracle to take place. Wind has to be at work and playing a significant role in peeling back this top layer of water, exposing this walkway with a bit of supernatural at work here. This is my favorite crossing spot, but again, honestly, either of them can work because God is amazing. God's amazing. We don't get a vote. Where it happened, and what we do know is that it did happen, and this is a pretty amazing God moment. What's the spiritual lesson for today, for this moment? Well, there's a few. Again, in this story, God has led his people to an exact location. It was very important that he trust them. It was very important that he followed his direction. It's very important that they maneuvered their life to go exactly where God was telling them, to a specific place. And then he uses a powerful storm to reveal a pathway to freedom, a pathway to their future that no one knew was there, but it was there. And it was there like from the foundation of the world. That pathway forward was always, they couldn't see it, but God always could. And so the lesson today is more connected to where you're at in this story. First of all, maybe if you're not following God these days, maybe you're ignoring him, you've put him on the shelf, or you've never followed God. Maybe you refuse to follow him to that place that he's been leading you in life, to that campsite that he's directed you to, the place that God has set and said, this is where I want you to go. If that's you, you need to get your life back on track. That's where you need to go. You need to repent, and you need to get to the campsite. You need to go where God has been leading you. Some of you today are listening, and you need to get back to following God so that you can get to that location. And sure, you don't know why God wants you there. And sure, it seems maybe scary and confusing, and it doesn't make sense to you. You look at it and you're like, that just seems like a dead end. That seems like an awful idea. But the thing is, God has a plan for your life. God has a plan for your life, but you have to trust Him. And you got to follow Him to where He's leading you, even if it doesn't seem comfortable, even if it doesn't seem amazing, even if it seems awful. Well, that's the first thing. The first person. Maybe you need to get to the campsite. You need to get where God's been calling you, and you need to get back on God's track for your life. The second person, some of you have been following God, and you're at the campsite right now, and you are very afraid. You're terrified by your situation. You are so very, very, very afraid. The sea is on one side. The army of doom is hunting you down on the other side. You can't go north and south. You are trapped in. And on top of that, maybe you're in the midst of a massive life storm. An incredible life storm that battered by the tornado of life. My words to you, if that is your crunch moment, my words to you are, stand firm and watch the deliverance of the Lord. Basically straight from the book of Exodus here. Stand firm and watch the deliverance of the Lord. If you are where God has led you to be, then you can trust Him in this storm, in this stuck moment, because God uses powerful storms and awful moments to open up hidden paths to His wonderful future. God uses powerful storms and awful moments to open up the hidden paths to our wonderful future. If you've been following God and you've been thrashed by the storm, stand strong. Keep praying, keep believing. God will make a way for you. In fact, if you're out there and you're typing, you can say, God will make a way for me! Exclamation point. God will make a way for you. God will make a way for you. That's the second group. The third group is this. Some of you now see the long hidden path, and it's finally become visible to you, but you haven't stepped onto it yet. It's there in front of you. Maybe a job has been opened, or an opportunity has been opened in front of you, but it's kind of a big deal. There's a bit of faith required, actually, to step forward here, because there's a lot of uncertainty. It's not as easy as maybe you always thought it would be. Maybe a friendship opportunity, but what if that doesn't go well? Remember, the Egyptians aren't going to make it through the path. Just because it's open doesn't mean it's going to be safe and it's going to stay open forever. If God has opened a path for you and your future, don't be afraid. Walk it in faith. Don't hold back. If He's opened up the path forward, take it, walk into your future, walk into freedom, walk into your future with faith. But you've got to walk. They don't just stand at the shore and marvel and say, those walls of water look pretty big. I'd like to see something else happen before I take a step. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29, speaking of the Red Sea, says, by faith, they crossed the Red Sea. By faith, they crossed the Red Sea as though they were on dry land. When the Egyptians attempted to do this, they were drowned. If God has opened your path forward, trust Him. Walk it in faith. In faith. Remember, God has this hidden pathway prepared from the beginning of time. This Exodus was always known. Their awful slavery was always known, but also their path to freedom. Nothing in your life, good or bad, has not been known by God from the beginning of time. And He has always had a plan and a path for you. He has always had a plan and a path for you. You got to trust him. He has both the plan for you and the power to reveal it and help you walk in it, but you need to walk it in faith. You need to push down that fear. Don't let fear drive you from going to the campsite. Don't let fear cripple you as you're at the shore to turn against God when you need to stand firm. Don't let fear keep you from walking forward when the pathway is open. Be strong and very courageous. We have a great God. What hope we have as we seek to follow him in every season of life, challenging or easy. God can always be trusted. Here's the challenge for us today. Challenge is this: assess where you are. Not at campsite in storm, hidden path open in front of you. Assess where you are and take your next step. I really need to trust you and the Spirit to figure out the exact application for you on this one. Either get back on track with God, stand strong in faith, trusting God's hidden path, or walking forward in faith. Spirit of Jesus, you are the teacher, you are the guide. I ask you to speak clearly, gently, loudly to all of us on where we're at and what your next steps are for us. We trust you. Help us to trust you. Grow in us courage, boldness, and faith. If you're out there and you have not been following God, and you need to recommit your life to following God or dedicate your life to following God, I suggest praying something like this: God, here I am. I'm sorry. I now choose to follow you with all of my life, to trust you with your leading, whether it makes sense to me or not, whether life is challenging or easy. From now on, I will follow you and I will trust you that you will see me through and that you will make a way for me. Fill me with your Spirit. Forgive me. My life belongs to you. I dedicate my life to Jesus of Nazareth, here and forever. God, I bless this church with a spirit of boldness and courage and faith. Open our ways forward. In Jesus of Nazareth's name we pray. Amen.